Hello everyone, Rhonda here. Welcome back to my channel in my studio here. And today I'm going to show you a video that I did where I use the Derivan Open Medium to paint wet into wet with acrylics. And what we're going to be painting today is actually some apples. And I'll show you this as an example. This is a set of pears that I did using that Alla Prima method with the wet into wet. And I bought these little cutting boards. They're quite fun little boards that I found. And so I'm painting decorative fruit on them. So this was a pear one that I did. And today I'm going to take you down to my table and show you how I paint some apples. And it's an interesting technique. It's different than the basic acrylics that we've been normally doing, where you're doing straight pure acrylic where it dries more quickly. This is wet on wet. When I painted this one, it actually took about 48 hours to fully dry. That's how good this open medium is. So anyways, let's go down to my table and I will show you how I paint some apples. Now, since I'd already done the pears, I decided I wanted to do some apples. So what I actually did is I just set up a black sheet, and I used one of my cell phone as the flashlight and another camera to take the pictures, set up some apples, and I just took some pictures so I could see where the shadows are and that sort of thing. And just set them out in a few different ways. These were just two of them that I printed out. But this is a good way when you're doing a still life like this to set up how you want to have it look, just some ideas. I wanted to look at the colors, the way the shadows would look, that sort of thing. So that's what I did. And it turns out that the one that I kind of like for this particular painting the most is this one where I have them stacked, because this is a vertical thing, because it needs to be able to hang. So this is the reference that I'm going to be using, and I'll put a link to this picture on my web page where people can look at it. So have a look for that. Now, color-wise, what I've got here, first of all, I'll tell you this board. So what I did with the board is I sanded it down and then took any sharp edges off and that. And then I coated it with this Global Art Multi-Surface Sealer from the Heritage line. And basically what this is it's just a clear sealer. And the reason I used that is just to seal my board and prep the surface. But I wanted to keep it clear because I wasn't sure at the time what sort of a background I wanted on it. If I'd known ahead of time what kind of background I wanted on them, I probably would have just gone in with that color and put the background color on. But because I wasn't sure, and on some of them I might want to have the wood showing, I put the sealer on. Now, the one thing with the sealer is that it will make your surface a little bit smoother than what you're maybe used to with just a matte paint surface. But that's what I use. The one other thing that I'm going to use today that I haven't used before on film is the Derivan Matisse Open Medium. So what this is it's a fairly new product. I think it came out last year. It might have been the year before. But it is a medium that will make your paint act a lot more like oils. It thickens it, and it also keeps it open longer. So I actually used this on a flower painting, and it was still wet over 48 hours later. So this is a really good medium that makes it act like oils to get the effect that you want. So I'll show you here. It's quite a sticky, almost glue-like medium. I'm just going to put some of that out on my desk here. I'll show you how I paint using that. Now, my colors are my standard color palette. I have my Hansa yellow, dairylide yellow, yellow oxide, naphthol red light, pine green, burnt sienna, phthalo blue, red violet, and my titanium white. Now, one other color that I am going to put out, because I want to make my background fairly similar to that other one, burnt umber. And that's going to be kind of one of my colors that I use to tie everything together with harmony. So that's what this is the burnt umber. I'm just going to put out a little bit of that. And burnt umber is very close to the center of your color wheel. So it's one of the earth tones, and it is a very, it's a color that I'm going to use for harmony. So I'll use it in my background, and then I'll probably add some of the burnt umber to the different areas as I paint them as well. If you have a common color that you add into all the colors in your painting, it creates what's called harmony. So basically that undertone is in everything in the painting. So I also have my little cap of extender here if I want it. Now the extender is a thinner version that will extend the length of time your paint stays open. So if I want the paint to be thin but stay wet longer, I'll use the extender. If I want it to be thicker, I'll feed in some of that open medium. The brushes that I'm going to use today, I put out a couple here. So I've got my 3/4 inch brush that I'm going to use for my background to begin with. And then I decided to put out a number 8 flat and a number 6 filbert, because I thought if I wanted to do any detail work with corners and that sort of thing, I'd put out the filbert. But those are the 2 brushes that I'm going to be using. I will have links to all the brushes and to the paints in the description below, and to the mediums as well. So the first thing that I'm actually going to do is I'm going to just kind of sketch in here using just a little bit of this. And I'm going to just put a little bit of water in it, keep it nice and thin. This is just the burnt umber. I'm just going to go in here and I'm going to kind of sketch out how I want this to look. So this is my reference photo. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to have, I'm just going to move this over a little bit. I'm going to have the apples sitting around about here, I think. So I'll have one kind of right in here, have the other one beside it. I want to have this one a little bit bigger. This is just me sketching these things in. I'll have another one beside it, and then I'm going to have this other one kind of sitting on top of it here. And I think for my background, because I'm going to have these guys kind of sitting here with some shadow going this way, and then I think I'm going to have my background split about right here as to what this is the table and this is the back part of it. So that's kind of my rough idea of how I'm going to put that in there. And I'll have this picture up in the corner of the video the way I have previously for you guys, so that you can see it as we go. Okay, so one of the things that I want to do first here is I just want to look at, on my apples, one thing that you'll notice when you look at the picture is that my yellow, because I have it set so that the yellow is facing the light, my light's coming in from this direction, and it's quite a bright light. I used a flashlight in a dark room to give it good shadows and everything. So you can see how this area where the light is hitting it really glows. And so I want that to be quite a glowy area in those apples. So I'm actually going to put in a bit of an undertone just with my Hansa yellow. And I'm not going to keep that wet yet. I'm just going to put it in there dry. And by doing that, just have this Hansa yellow in there nice and thick. I'm not worried too much about it because it's all going to get covered up. I'm just going to put this Hansa yellow in there. I'm going to do it on all the apples, even though this one will be mostly covered up in shadow. I just want to have that in there to just be that nice deep undertone, or that nice bright undertone, I mean, sorry, in the apples. Okay. Now, one thing that I want to do right away just for myself, is I want to go in there with some of my background. So I'm going to take some of this color here, and I'm going to go in and just paint this kind of a darker color with the burnt umber over here on this side where it'll be more in shadow. So this will be my shadow side. And I'm going to actually add a little bit of violet to that just to keep it cool, because I want my shadow area to be cool and dark. So especially in here behind the apples, I want that to be cool and dark back in there. And right in here where we're going to have that deep shadow in between the apples there. I want that all to be nice and cool and dark. And then as I come out of that, I'm going to take in less of the violet as I move away from that shadow area. And as I come over here, I'll put in less of that dark violet. And I'm actually going to even go in and lighten this a little bit and bring in some light into this side. Now a lot of this will probably change as I paint, but I'm just getting in some ideas right now for what I might want this to look like. I'm going to have my table like that, and then I'm going to have, I want to put in quite a bit more of some light on this side, where the light's coming in here. Now I'm also going to have that same light hitting up here where it's going to be a bit of a through light. So the light will be coming through here and hitting up here on this wall. And then it'll get darker as we go down. This is all very impressionistic, and I'm not making anything too firm yet as to what I'm doing. I'm just kind of playing with it, playing with my background a little, just putting in there so that you can kind of tell that that's the wall and that's the ground. I want to have things a little bit darker up here, maybe a little bit of that violet in there, but not as much as below, because we are on the shadow side over here. Now I'll make sure that I have that line coming through in the right spot. And like I say, a lot of this will change as I go, but this is just a basic idea for my background. So now what I want to do here, I'm actually going to just tuck this kind of under here so I can see it. Now, apples are spherical, so you're going to want to pay a lot of attention to where your shadows are and all of that sort of thing. So I'm going to go in, first of all, and kind of shape my apples a little bit. So I want to take some of this color here that I had for my deep shadow. I'm going to take my smaller brush and I'm going to go in here, and I just want to kind of shape the way my shadow is going to sit for this apple here. I'm going to shrink that apple down a little bit because I feel like the back apple's getting a little too big. I'm just going to get some of that in there. And we're going to have because the apple is sitting up on those other two apples, I'm going to have a bit of a shadow in there as well, where that other apple is sitting. And I'll end up going over some of this with the yellow again after. But I just kind of want to have that shadow in there better. Now I'm going to come in here as well with more of this color. I'm going to just kind of trying to shape those apples a little bit better. We'll probably have to do some little bit more changes to that as well as we go. And you'll see I put in more shadow than I need, and that's, I like to paint in and out. So put in more shadow than you need and then you take it out, that sort of thing. Okay, so now I'm going to just remove a little bit of this background here off my palette. Now, because I have all of these apples on the same plane, so it's a stack of apples, it's not some in front and behind, whereas with the pears, you can see I had, this pear was in the front and these pears were further back, so they were a little more muted. But here, everything's up on the front of the painting. It's going to make a difference in the way I paint them, because I'm not going to have to put some in shadow further behind. I am going to have to, because of the way my light's coming in this way, do more shadow on this apple here. So one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start by putting in some of my shadows. Now, you want to look at the different tones in your picture. And so this is quite a kind of a dark brownish red tone. So I'm going to take the red that I have here and I'm going to tone it down using that harmony color. So that's my burnt umber, is my harmony color. And I'm going to tone it down quite far using that color. But you can see that that's still very red compared to this. So I'm going to actually go in and take a little bit of the green. And what the green will do is that will take that red out of it. You see what that does? That takes that red out of it and makes it a lot more of a brown color. Because green is a complement to red. It's the opposite side of the color wheel, which means that it will tone it and take it towards the center of the color wheel. That's getting closer to what I want. Now here's where I'm going to start feeding in this open medium. And I just take a little bit and I stir it into the paint, and that will keep this paint wet. So I'm going to start with this kind of deeper shadow over here on this apple. And I want to make my apple, in this case here, I need to round it out a little bit, have it come up here. And then my top of the apple, I want it a little bit flatter here, but that's also going to be in shadow. So I'm just kind of, I don't have a lot of paint here yet, but just kind of want to have the top of that apple in some shadow. And then this side is also going to be in some shadow. Keeping in mind that a lot of this is going to change, but so now I'm going to go a little bit more red. But I am going to keep this apple a little more toned in a lot of areas because it is on the back side. So I'm taking this little bit of red and I'm just putting it in there. And one thing you'll find as you're learning to use this medium, you will find that because you're painting wet into wet, if you're not used to that, you end up with your paint feels like it's kind of disappearing sometimes into the other paint. So you have to just watch that and use your brush lightly, because the harder you use your brush, if I come in here like this, I can scrape a lot of that paint off because it's all wet. Now I want to do some on this main apple as well. So this shadow here on this apple is strong, but it's not going to be as strong as this one because this one's further away from the light source. This whole apple here is going to be a little lighter. The one thing you will notice though is that this is going to be your lightest spot. So you're going to have more contrast here than you would on this apple. This apple is going to be more toned back. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to take a little bit of this dark and I'm going to kind of come in here and just shape this apple a little bit. So I want to have my shadow side here. Mix in a little bit more of that. Remember to feed your medium in regularly, because if you don't, you'll forget and then your paint will go dry on you. And then I'm going to put in my shadow on this side of this apple as well. And this apple, because it's a little bit higher, a lot of it's going to be, of this part of it is going to be in shadow. So now I'm going to come in and I'm going to take some of this red. Now this is the naphthol red light, which is quite an orange red. And you can see I went with the orangey red because this apple is quite an orange red, but it also has some of that yellow in it. So I want to take some yellow and put it in there and make it even more of a bright color. I want to really brighten that up. I'm not afraid to use my paint relatively thickly here too. You see how that's that nice orange color. And for this part, I'm sort of just basing in my colors, and then I'm going to go back in and I'm going to add in a lot of the detail that's going to make it really look like an apple. See, and I'm bringing this red color in over top of some of this shadow because I want to mix the two colors together and have that shadow have that red tinge as well. I'm going to come right out here because I want this apple to be a little bit wider. I'm just bringing it in like this, and then as I get over here, I'm lifting my pressure off the brush because I don't want to take out too much of that undertone that I have there. Now I want to come in here and get this part of this apple showing properly so that you can see that the apple is kind of tilted towards you. So I need that deeper color of the yellow in there. So I'm going to take my deeper yellow and I'm going to mix it in a little bit with some of this. Kind of give it that orange tinge, and then I'm going to take a little bit of the toning color in it as well. And some white to lighten that up quite a bit. Now it's a little too red for my liking because I want it to be more of a grayish almost color in there. So I'm going to go back again into that green. And if I put too much in, that's all right. But you see how that grayed that down, made it more of a tan color? That's what I was going for. I pinch wipe my brush. Now I want to have kind of a center over here. And this is going to really kind of come around like this on this apple. And then that's where it'll come up against that other one. So I'm going to do that, but then I'm going to go darker in this center area. And this will change a few times, but I actually take it darker than what it shows in the picture there and really kind of come down in deep here where the center of the apple is. See, now it gives it more of a three-dimensional look. And this one here, I want to just take a little bit of that dark and I want to come right down in here where the center of that apple would be. And this one here, you don't see it because that apple is just pointed straight up. You see how wet this paint is staying? That's because of that open medium. Now, as I come kind of out of this, I'm going to be coming down into here. I'm going to go ahead and throw a little bit of this in there, even though that's not quite the right tone that I want. But I just want to have that more shadow on this back side of the apple. And it's going to kind of come up like that behind there. Okay, now you see here how this is quite a bit of a, it's almost a greenish yellow in here. So I'm going to go in and try and make a little bit more of a greenish yellow to put in some of that area. Now, one thing I shouldn't be doing is I shouldn't be rinsing it in my water because the water is the enemy of this open medium. So what I really need to be doing is dipping into my extender and just rinsing it out with that. So I am actually going to, so that I don't mess this up, I'm going to actually remove my water and put it over on my table. That's just one of my things that I do to help myself. So I'm going to take some of this yellow here and I'm going to add in just a touch of the green, just a little tiny bit. Have that green in there. And if I feel like I'm getting too green, I can always tone it back a little bit. I kind of like that, and so I'm going to come in here and I'm just going to smooth that in over this. You see how when I pull down that red, it goes into there? If I want to keep it from doing that, I would have to push up from the bottom. I want a little more of that green in there, I think. I'm going to kind of overdo it at first, just to see how that'll look. And kind of just come in here like this from this side because it's all wet. So it's going to mix together on your board as well. And same thing with down here. I want to have some of this greenish color in here. You know, you're probably thinking, oh my gosh, she's going crazy. Look at the color she's adding in there. But this will all make sense in the end. We hope. If it doesn't, you just try again. I just want to bring some of that in there, some of that nice kind of greenish tinge into it. Now I'm going to take some of the yellow oxide and mix that in with some of that green. Yellow oxide is a lot more toned. I'm going to kind of come in here with some of that as well. And now this is personal preference, but I kind of like to move from apple to apple as I go. I just find when I find a tone I like, I kind of like to put it in a lot of areas. I'm going to kind of come out here with this and make that top curve a little more. Now, if I want to get more opaque and have it sit more on top of those other colors, because that hansa yellow is a very, it's not a very opaque color. I'll add some white to it to kind of get it to sit in over top of those others. But you got to be careful with that, because as soon as you add in that white, you take out the opacity, or you make it more opaque, and then you lose some of your undertone colors. It's very easy to lose those undertones. You don't want to lose all of those by putting in that extra white. Now I want to go in with some of my yellow, and I'm going to add a little dairylide to it, I think, just to change it up. So I want to have a very nice bright yellow area in here. And I want to round this apple out a little bit more. You see how I merge those two together, and I just take the lightest, I'm using the lightest pressure there just to get it to, for the two colors to mix without it, I want the colors to mix and not take over each other. And all these little bits and pieces that you're adding in here will add interest to your apples. Now I want to take some of that, but I want to tone it down a bit and have it come in back here on this apple, because it's in shadow, but it's still a lighter color on the apple because it's the yellow. And I try to also use my brush in the direction that I want. Like if I'm going with the curve of the apple, I'll use the brush in that direction of that curve. Now I want to go in again with some more of this. I'm going to take a bit of that green into it and just kind of come in here again, round that off into the red. You see the difference if I bring the yellow into the red versus here if I bring the red into the yellow. There's quite a difference. And you'll notice me wiping my brush a lot, because if I don't wipe the brush, I'm going to end up just taking out all the stuff that I did, because this paint is so wet. Now I want a bit more of that yellow in here where the light would be hitting it. And I'm actually going to take a little bit of white into that. Remember to feed your medium too. And I'm going to have the curve there where that light is hitting that part of the apple. And you see how all of a sudden that looks way more rounded up there? I'm going to kind of do the same thing here. I want to have some of that light coming down on that apple. But you see, if I go back in without wiping my brush, it's going to take all that out again that I just did. And there's times that you want to do that, and there's times that you don't. Come back in here with some more of this yellow. You see there, I picked up red when I did that. So if I just went right back in, I would put that red back where I put that yellow that I want there. It's very tempting to just keep rubbing it, but if you do, you're going to undo all the stuff that you just did. And I can at any time go back into that and add more to this because it stays wet because of that open medium. Now I'm also putting some up and down strokes there because I kind of see it looks like it's up and down on that apple. Now I'm going to take a little bit of the darker color in there, and I'm going to just a little bit more define where this shadow sits on this apple here from the apple above it. And I'm going to kind of have it come up to there. The one thing that using this open medium does too is it gives you a lot more opportunity to play with your colors and really lay in layers of color. See here, I decided I wanted to have a little bit more red on this side of the apple in the shadow there. Now I'm going to clean my brush a little using my extender. And then I just pinch wipe the brush. Then I take some more extender and I just pinch wipe the brush. Now I want to go in and make sure that my highlights are in there. So I'm going to take yellow, my nice bright hansa. I'm going to take a little bit of white into that. Make sure you feed your medium. Now keeping in mind that you have to be a little bit careful with this because as soon as you put that white in there, you're going to be opaquing it and covering up all your other work. So, but I just want to come in here and kind of just lightly brush in my highlight. I've got that really nice light spot there on that one. And I've got one right here where the light is really hitting it on this one. And a small one right in here where the light will be hitting this apple. And those shines are also going to give it a more three-dimensional look. Now I'm going to kind of come out of that a little bit. But you notice how that immediately covered up a lot of that other stuff I had done. So if you don't want to be covering up your other work, you got to be really careful about using that opaque white. Now I do want a little bit of this lighter color here just to use on this edge here. And what I'm doing that for is to really show that this apple's sitting on top of that other one. I want that edge to kind of come out a bit more. And bringing that reddish brown out into this side a little bit to just add a little more interest. I want to have a little bit more of that green in there, I think, too. So I'm just going to take a little bit of the green on the brush. I'm just going to whisper it over this just to add that green tinge to the apple. See how that just adds that whisper of green? Now I do feel like I've kind of lost my center on this one, so I'm going to go back in. I'm going to put in that deeper center area again. And then I'm going to start coming out of it. Using this. And I might even go in and take some really dark, just right down in there, into the deepest part of that center. And then I'm just going to bring in some of this lighter in over top of it. You see how that brought my center back? And now what I want to do as well is I want to come in with some of this light again on this side and just where the light would be hitting that. But at the same time, I don't want to lose the shadow underneath this apple. So I'm going to come in with a little bit of a darker shadow there. Right in that area. Now, one thing that I don't have here is I don't have a really good defined shadow where this apple is sitting a little bit in front of that one. So I'm going to come in here with my dark, and I'm going to do like a dark reddish color. And I'm going to come right in here and just bring some of that in here. Make that a little bit darker in there. Because that area would be under in the shadow there. And then I can always come back in with some more of my slightly toned yellow and bring it back in over top of that here. Completely different process when you're painting with using like this open medium and that versus your usual pure acrylic that I do. It really is quite a different experience, and I recommend trying it even if you decide that you don't care for painting wet into wet. It's quite an interesting project to try. See, now as I go down around the bottom of this apple, I'm going to get a little bit darker again. Because that's where the shadows are going to be. Add a little bit more dark to the shadow on this side. Now, if I want to have a little bit more of a dark, deep shadow in between them there, I'm going to actually make a really dark color here. I'm going to come in. Now for this, I actually am probably going to go to my filbert here, just so that I can get in there a bit better, because I want this shadow in here to be quite a bit deeper. And by using the filbert, I can really get in there without it, getting into everything else that I've done. So here I'm putting in this deeper, darker shadow, very deep in there. And I'm going to bring it just along the bottom there. And here too. I want this side to be much more shadowed. You see what a difference that makes already? And I'm going to bring in a little bit of that, but I'm going to make it just slightly lighter up here. A bit more of a brown as opposed to the dark with the blue in it down there. And this is where you go back and forth between your original painting and between your background and your focal point to get the change in effect that you want. I'm going to take some of that dark, and I'm going to go down deep in here. I'm just going to put a little bit of it down in here as well. You see how adding those deeper shadows in also popped this one and this one forward, because they were starting to sink into the background a little too much. Just going to add a little bit of it right in here on the apple. But because my apple is also so wet, it doesn't have quite the same effect as it does on the other area there. I'm going to go back to this brush here, clean it out a bit. Okay, so now I'm going to go back in to my red, and I'm going to throw in a little bit of this for a different color. Make kind of that reddish orange, but I am going to tone it down just a bit. So I'm going to come in here, just kind of add a little bit more red interest to this apple. And you'll see I'm just going to kind of lightly brush it in over top of this, and then I can even use my finger if I want. You just got to be careful because you don't want to put too much pressure with your finger, because that'll wipe your paint right off. I'm just using a feather light touch of that brush because I don't want to get too, I don't want to take off all that under stuff. I just want to add a little more color to it. Now I want to go in with a little bit more of this. Make it kind of a lighter red orange. I'm going to go in and just kind of whisper a little bit of that in there. Have some of it come out here as well. Add a little more color interest. Might add a little bit of that in here as well. You'll see I'm not 100% following the picture there. That's just my inspiration. I'm kind of just also doing a bit of my own thing. Now that's too bright back there, so I'm going to come back in with a little bit of the dark and go over it. Constantly pinch wiping my brush. Adding back in some of the shadows. If I feel like I've taken something out too much, I can always add more back in. I want to go back in with a little bit of this light color here. Again, being careful not to use too much of it because that's going to opaque everything. But I want to make sure I have this nice light hit here. And you see how this here, how I've got some of the red and some of the yellow all together in there. That's what I really want, because I want to have lots of that interest in it. I don't want it to look stagnant or like it's, you know, lines of color. I want those colors to mix like that. I find that I really, really like this open medium, especially when I'm doing animals. I've been using it a lot on my horses lately. So I find it quite nice to use on those horses. quite happy with those apples now. Just want to smooth that edge out there. So next thing I wanted to do is I want to go in and put my stems in on the apples. So this guy here, you're not going to see much of a stem, but I'm going to go in with a little bit of the dark and just put a little bit of one in there. But you're not going to see that one much. These other guys, we're going to come in with more of a yellowish brown to start with. And I'm just going to come in and I'm going to make a little bit of a stem there and up here. And then I'm going to come in with some dark here and just kind of touch the back side of that one, take it out a bit more. And I want a little bit of light highlight on that where the light would be hitting it. Adding a little bit of dark to the top there. And I'm actually going to come in and smooth this out a bit because I don't want that to get too big in there, this stem. I want it to just be the impression of that stem. And then it's going to disappear down into some shadow in here too. There, like that. Now, next thing I'm going to do, I'm actually going to take, if I can find it here, ruler. Basically what I need is just something flat. So I'm just going to grab another board here. Because I just want to make sure, and I do this quite often, that I haven't, you see how when I do that, you can see that my table line is higher on the one side than the other. So I'm actually going to take this, take a little bit of lighter color here. I'm just kind of coming in here. I'm just going to put that up a little bit higher. My table line so that it matches. Because you don't want it to look like your apples are sitting on a crooked table. Now some of that I'm going to kind of just blur out back there anyway, because it's not, you don't get into your apple there. It's not critical, but so now I'm going to take some of this darker color, add a little bit of light to it, maybe a little bit of the yellow even, just to have some more light coming in on this side. This is where my light is hitting the table. And then we go over into the shadow. But I'm also going to come in with some of this shadow color and bring it back into the light. Just a back and forth. Just to add interest to the thing. I have a little bit of that light coming in here as well. And you see what I did there? I got into my apple. So now I got to go back in a little bit of my light color here and fix that. Now I'm kind of just looking for places where I might want to have, you know, say a little bit more shadow in here where that other apple's sitting on top of it. So this is down to the fine detail stage now. Come in there with a little bit more shadow on that one, but then I'm going to also brush it back out a little bit. Take a little bit of this light and have it come through here on the background where the through light would be hitting. You notice when I went back to my background, I for the most part went back to pure acrylic because I'm not needing to do the I'm not needing to keep it wet like I wanted to on the front. Now one thing I don't want is I don't want this area to be as dark as that area. I want it to be a little bit darker than my table, but I don't want it to be quite that dark. So I'm going to go in here with a little bit of this. I'm just going to brighten this up a little bit here. See what a difference that makes in your shadows? I can have a little bit more dark up here. But down where the light is by the apple, I want to have it lighter. So I quite like that. I'm going to just take a little bit more of this light. Now I'm going to dip into some extender. Just want to have the light come a little bit more in here. Paint this bit up here. And eventually I'm going to paint the entire board this darker color, the umber, the sides and everything. That's why I'm painting that part darker there. That's quite nice. So I think I'm going to call that done for the apples. So I will just sign my name to that, and we will call that complete. I just noticed one other little thing, which anybody who's watched me for a while knows I tend to do. I feel like that needs to be a little bit more rounded there. Just on that spot. There. All right, we're putting the brush down. I hope you enjoyed that lesson. So give me a like and a subscribe, and let me know if you have ever painted wet into wet with your acrylics or with oils. I haven't actually ever tried oils myself because of the chemicals involved, but this open medium, I've been told, mimics the feeling of oils. So anyways, let me know in the comment section what you thought, and if you have any questions, and I will see you on the next video.